We've done lists like this before. We did one for all good things, which actually, now I think about it, probably could do with a bit of an updating. But this has been a funny one because this particular list is something that has gone through several different iterations before we ever hit publish on it. So please make sure you go and check out the written article that Nick Edgeworth has done, because that man has put so much work and revisions into this list because, well, Star Trek keeps changing things, that it's actually been a hoot. So we now feel relatively confident that we can put this list out now and it shouldn't age like milk. Okay, so with that, I'm Sean Ferrick for Trek Culture, and here is Star Trek Voyager Endgame Fiction versus Reality. Number 10, the uniforms. So what happens in the episode is that the uniforms that were introduced in All Good Things and then reintroduced in Deep Space Nine's The Visitor make a return here. These are the ones that are a solid color from the waist up. They have a flap that is reminiscent of the monster maroon from the original series movies. And of course we have the rank insignia here on the chest as opposed to on the neck. There in fact isn't a collar on these uniforms. Gone are the duochrome versions, like for example the black bar across the shoulders, and I will be completely honest, this has always been one of my favorite uniforms. So, what really happens? As time moves on through the 2380s and 90s, Starfleet obviously does a little bit of a back to basics look. Remember that when we went into the era of First Contact Nemesis, you had that black uniform, grey across the shoulders with the department colour on the collar. They revert this back to coloured department uniforms. We see it in the flashback for Picard Season 1. We see then across the collar, or across the shoulders I should say, for Picard Season 2. When we have Star Trek Prodigy in 2383, we have uniforms that are not dissimilar to what we see in Endgame, but we also see that when we go forward into the late 2390s and 2400s, we get a uniform that is again quite similar to the style in that there is a flap across the chest, but this version has department color across the shoulders. So it looks like the closest we're going to get to the actual Endgame All Good Things uniforms is what we see in the early 2380s being worn by Admiral Janeway and the crew of the Dauntless. Number 9, Voyager. So what happens in the episode is that according to Admiral Janeway, it takes, from the date of the action of Endgame, a full 16 years to get the ship home to the Alpha Quadrant. They lose members of the crew along the way, including 7 of 9, including CHAKOTAY. Tuvok succumbs to a degenerative neurological disease. It's frankly not a rosy time, and Voyager itself, though physically she returns, she is retired from service almost immediately. The nice version there is that she is turned into a museum. What happens in reality? Well, Voyager gets home an awful lot faster. In fact, she gets home by that afternoon. And then she's turned into a museum. That's actually quite a nice thing to come out of both Endgame and Picard's 3rd season. In the 6th episode, The Bounty, once Picard and crew arrive at the Fleet Museum over 8th and Prime, we get to see a glorious shot of Voyager preserved for posterity and open to people who want to come and see this ship, who cut her teeth further out than any of those other relics on show. It is a beautiful scene in which 7 of 9 explains to Jack Crusher that this is where she found her family. And if that isn't just a wonderful scene, I don't really know what is. Number 8, Federation technology. In the episode, Admiral Janeway arrives in the Federation shuttle, which is sporting this armor, which I think we all just kind of had a moment of yeah when that first deployed, transphasic torpedoes, and a neural interface that is actually right inside of her brain that allows her to pilot the shuttle by thought alone. As Janeway explains, these advancements were made necessary by their time in the Delta Quadrant, and not least by their experiences with the Borg. What really happens though is actually, it's a little bit of a surprise. We do have other ships in the fleet that have something called ablative armor, but that's quite different. It's strong, but it's not quite as strong as the armor we see on both Voyager itself by the time it gets back to the Alpha Quadrant and that shuttle. The Queen does say in the closing moments of Endgame that she had managed to assimilate the armor technology. So perhaps it was simply retired because, well, perhaps it was only useful against the Borg. Now, it did do pretty well against a couple of Klingon Nagvar-class battle cruisers, but I think this one was retired more for ease of storytelling than anything else. Transphasic energy is studied by the Federation, but seems to have been never weaponized, and as of the most recent episode of Star Trek Picard, there is no neural interface so small it can be buried inside the user's brain. Number 7, the Borg. In the episode, the shadow of the Borg still looms quite high over the Federation, so much, in fact, that Admiral Janeway is being brought in as a guest speaker for an entire semester on the Borg at Starfleet Academy. Now, as she's described as, she's literally the woman who wrote the book on the Borg, so let's prepare all those cadets for what they might have to encounter. This is set in 2404. In reality, the Borg are injected with a neurolithic pathogen. That brings chaos to order, as Janeway describes it. We see the destruction of the unit complex, the apparent death of the Borg Queen, and the shutdown of the collective as we understand it. This ends up destroying the transwarp hub thanks to a couple of handily placed transphasic torpedoes as well, and frankly, things look pretty rosy. A couple of years go by and the protostar is in the Delta Quadrant. They discover an inert Borg cube. These kids don't know what the Borg are, and so they board. And quite frankly, it becomes one of the more frightening episodes with Borg. We as the audience know exactly what the Borg are. They've no idea. And in their ignorance, you kind of catch yourself going, you're doing all the wrong things. They do manage to escape. But in waking that cube, we know the collective in some form or another is still out there. Let's go forward to Star Trek Picard, of course. So, Star Trek Picard's second season sees the introduction of a queen from another reality, played by Annie Wersching, who ends up fusing with Agnes Jurati and creating their own spin-off collective. Then you get Picard Season 3 and the revelation that there is... You can kill individual queens, but you can't kill the queen, in the same way that, you can kill drones, but taking down the collective is pretty hard. And the queen is trying to use Jack Crusher and the weaponized DNA from Picard to assimilate all of the people who've been infected with his DNA throughout the Federation. Now, thankfully, this has stopped again, and it does look like, at this stage, this might be the end of the Borg. Oh my. Number 6, Tom Paris. What happens in the episode is that as the years go by, Tom leaves Starfleet. He has more than earned his reputation. He's vindicated himself against the charges that he was up against all the way back in Caretaker. He has married B'Elanna Torres. His daughter, Miral, is off working for Starfleet. He's a full-time holonovelist. And quite frankly, things are looking pretty rosy. What really happens is that, yes, he does start to release some Captain Proton holonovels. He does have plenty more years left in Starfleet, including an inspection of the USS Cerritos, which sees the wonderful Brad Boimler doing his very best to get his commemorative plate of Tom Paris signed by Tom Paris, which leads to one of the funniest exchanges where Boimler, having crawled through all of the Jefferies tubes on the Cerritos, collapses into the bridge, looking like he's been covered in rust and dirt, only for Paris to jump him going, "He's a Kazon!" What? Number 5, Tuvok. What happens in Admiral Janeway's future is about as far from what you would want to happen as possible. It's revealed in Endgame that Tuvok is suffering from a neurological disorder which is only going to get worse the longer he is away from a member of his family. It can only be cured with a mind meld with a family member. We see that by Janeway's future, Tuvok has been confined to Starfleet Medical. He has lost his sense of mind. He still has logic to a point. He accuses Janeway of being an imposter because she arrives on a different day than her normally scheduled visits. Logic dictates she is not the person she claims to be. He still has enough awareness that he is able to inadvertently warn the Doctor that Janeway is undergoing this dangerous mission. So, although it is heartbreaking, Tuvok's condition, in a way, leads to at least a bit of understanding from Janeway's crew, because the Doctor tells Harry, Harry comes after Janeway, and Harry gives her the okay to go. What happens in reality is, thankfully, a little bit happier, though not without its bumps. Tuvok does make it back to the Alpha Quadrant, he does undergo that mind meld with a family member, and thankfully his condition is stopped and reversed, so that is brilliant. He then is part of the mission that uncovers the Pact-led conspiracy to blame Captain Freeman for the destruction of their homeworld, so that's fantastic. And then, about 20 years or so later, we see one of the creepiest smiles ever, when a changeling impersonating Tuvok tries to convince Seven of Nine to give away her location. It's honestly chilling. Now, thankfully, again, a few episodes later, the real Tuvok is returned to us, and it's even better, because he's the one who gives Seven her coveted 4th pip. Number 4, Chakotay. What happens in the episode is that Chakotay and Seven of Nine begin a relationship that sees them fall in love and get married. However, 3 years after the events of Endgame, had Admiral Janeway not changed things, Seven would be killed on an away mission, making it back just enough to die in her husband's arms. Although Chakotay would survive her, he would never be the same again, and by the time that Admiral Janeway sets out to leave Earth, he has already died. What happens in reality is quite different from this, because the inclusion of Chakotay and Seven's relationship at the 11th hour was quite jarring, really, for fans, because there wasn't really any lead up to it. So instead, Chakotay's taken a completely different path. Chakotay would become the captain of the experimental USS Protostar, going back to the Delta Quadrant, to several amused raised eyebrows. Like, if I spend 7 years somewhere, I'm taking a break before I go straight back there, okay? Now, it doesn't really work out, because the next thing we know, we have to find Chakotay because he's gone missing along with his entire crew. We only discover the Protostar itself. There are holographic recordings of what's going on, but as it stands, we still don't have Chakotay, and we have a lot of people hunting for him. Number 3, Seven of Nine. What happens in the episode is, quite frankly, depressing. In Admiral Janeway's future, Seven died 3 years after the events of Endgame, had there been no change, so there really wasn't much of a future there at all. So I'm really glad to say that in reality, that's not at all what happens. She makes it back with the rest of the crew and ship to the Alpha Quadrant. Things are not massively smooth sailing once she gets there. For example, Starfleet weren't exactly as keen on her as the crew of Voyager were. There was myriad reasons, but really they struggled with the whole ex-drone thing. They didn't exactly welcome her with open arms. So, with that being the case, she decided to go off and help those who needed help by joining the Fenris Rangers. She does this for quite some time, which helps her grow beyond that quite controlled state that we would often see when she is on Voyager. By the time we meet her in Star Trek Picard's first season, she is much more fluid, much more loose. She is drinking bourbon now instead of, half a glass of synthahol would get her pissed out of her mind. Things do change though, because both Admirals Picard and Janeway go to bat for her. So by the time of the 3rd season of Picard, she's become a commander in Starfleet. Now talk about a fast track. I would say she's well earned that rank though, just to be very clear. As the season goes on, this commander of the Titan A sees herself thrust into situation after situation that sees her in a position of command over the crew, and when the captain is killed, his dying action is to promote her, at least in a field commission at that point, which is then made official by Tuvok later on. As Captain Seven of Nine, she is given the commission of the USS Enterprise NCC 1701G, will you please give us the spin-off series? Number 2, Admiral Janeway. In the episode, the future that Admiral Janeway is living in is one that is marked with melancholy and regret over lives lost, the ones who weren't able to come home from the Delta Quadrant. Although there is a massive victory in those who she did manage to get back to the Alpha Quadrant, she is burdened with the list of everyone who couldn't share in that journey. We've seen enough of Janeway throughout 7 seasons of Voyager to actually be like, I absolutely believe that Admiral Janeway would set out to rewrite time. It is all done for altruistic reasons. It is all done to save lives. And what we know of Janeway is that that is something she would do. Janeway has always been quite clever about, she sticks close to the rules. As she says, she's never broken the Prime Directive. She's bent it on occasion, but never broken it. And that is an important distinction because technically, okay, right, we're going to the Prime Directive and the Temporal Prime Directive. That's a whole other conversation for another day. What happens in reality is because of the actions of future Janeway, contemporary Janeway does get back to the Alpha Quadrant much sooner than expected. So she is almost immediately promoted to Admiral, and she in fact is the one who issues the command to send Picard and the Enterprise E to Romulus in Nemesis. She's instrumental in the design and launch of the USS Protostar, and when that ship goes missing along with her crew, she takes it upon herself to find them aboard the newly christened USS Dauntless. After some understandable lack of understanding between Janeway and the pirate crew of the Protostar, everyone is able to communicate and everyone is able to understand each other, which in a happy confluence of events is able to save all of Starfleet, because the living construct, not fun, don't want one for Christmas. This Admiral Janeway is very much an extension of the one we know, and I am very excited to see what the next season of Star Trek Prodigy has in store for this character. Number 1, Icheb. What happens in the episode is, actually he's not mentioned at all in the future. Considering the amount of weight that's given to Tuvok and Chakotay and Seven of Nine's fate in the future, the fact that he's not mentioned at all suggests to us that actually there's no tragedy, he's got back with the rest, he's joined Starfleet, and he's doing okay. What happens in reality is, he does get back to the Alpha Quadrant, he does join Starfleet, but he's not okay. He, along with Seven, of course, is an ex-drone. That makes him, in certain circles, a very valuable commodity. So, he is kidnapped by Bjayzl, and then we get one of the most gruesome scenes of recent years in Star Trek. You know the scene I'm talking about. Our beautiful editor has probably got a big picture of it right here. A lot of people, including myself, were a bit like, okie dokie. When we saw that, yeah, poor old Icheb, and is then euthanized by Seven. So, I know we're kind of ending this list on a bit of a down, but Captain 7 of 9, everyone! Thanks very much for watching along. You're all awesome, you're wonderful. Who knows, we may be updating this list again when new seasons of Star Trek Prodigy drop. Everyone, thank you so much. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can catch us over on Twitter at TrekCulture. You can catch us on Instagram at TrekCultureYT. I'm at Sean Ferrick on the various socials as well. Don't forget, check out the original article by Nick Edgeworth. The poor man put so much work into this. We just kept changing it on him. You're all awesome and wonderful. Look after yourselves. Look after the people around you. It's so important. You deserve care. Everyone, live long and prosper till I see you again. Make it so. Star Trek.